In America, when someone dials 911, it's supposed to be a lifeline, the one call that connects fear to safety, chaos to control. But what if that call doesn't come from the streets? Not from a terrified victim in their home, or from a driver stranded on a dark highway, but from inside the very building where safety is supposed to live. Tonight, I want you to think about that, because this is not just another story about a strange call. This is about a phone that rang inside a police station, and when the officers picked it up, what they heard was something they could never explain. So lock your doors, turn down the lights, and don't move, because once you hear this call, you'll never look at a police station the same way again. Story 1, the dispatcher's reflection. The night was still, too still. Inside the Cleveland 911 dispatch center, the world seemed frozen. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed faintly above rows of gray cubicles, their cold light pooling across tired faces. It was past midnight, and the quiet was unsettling. Dispatchers liked a steady stream of calls, not because they enjoyed emergencies, but because silence meant uncertainty. Silence meant something was brewing. For Emily Carter, 6 years on the job had taught her one thing: calm was never safe. She leaned back in her chair, headset snug against her ears, eyes scanning the monitor's blank lines. Her hands, restless, tapped the desk. It wasn't fear she felt, not yet, but a strange anticipation that always came in the lulls. At 12:14 a.m., the silence cracked. Her console blinked. A call. Emily straightened immediately, slipping into her professional calm. She pressed the line and spoke with steady authority. 911, what's your emergency? But the voice on the other end made her blood run cold. Please, help me. Emily froze. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It wasn't the slurred tone of a drunk, or the panicked rush of a stranger in crisis. No, it was hers. Identical. Every syllable carried her breath, her cadence, her very essence. Her throat tightened. Who is this? The line crackled. The voice whispered again, sharp and terrified. He's in the house. Please, I'm upstairs. I don't know how long I can hide. Send someone now. Emily's heart stuttered. Her training screamed at her to stay composed, but her hands trembled against the keyboard. What's your location? She asked, fighting the quiver in her tone. The voice sobbed. 423, Willow Street. Emily's lungs seized. That was her address. Her fingers flew across the console, punching in the address. The system confirmed it. 423, Willow Street. Emily Carter's home. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She should have reported the call, escalated it, followed protocol. But protocol had never prepared her for this. For a copy of her own voice begging for help from inside her home. Forcing her breath steady, she whispered, stay calm. Officers are on the way. The other Emily's reply came in a ragged whisper. He's outside the door, please hurry. Then the line went dead. Emily shot out of her chair, headset nearly yanked from its port. I need a unit to 423, Willow Street, now, she barked to the nearest officer. Her colleague stared in confusion, but something in her panicked tone made them move. Within minutes, 2 cruisers were tearing toward her house. Emily waited in agony, staring at the dispatch screens, praying the call was some horrible prank. But she knew, in her bones, that it wasn't. Minutes dragged like hours until the radio cracked. Dispatch, this is Unit 6. We've cleared the residence. No sign of forced entry. No one inside. Emily's heart plummeted. What about the upstairs bedroom? She asked. Empty. House looks untouched. She sat frozen, unable to reply. It was impossible. She had heard herself, pleading, desperate, terrified. But the house was empty. 2 days later, Emily hadn't slept. The call gnawed at her mind. Her co-workers whispered about stress, about fatigue, about maybe she had imagined it. But deep down, she knew better. On the third night, at 12:14 a.m., the exact same time, her console lit up again. She answered with a shaking voice. 911, what's your emergency? And again, her own voice. He's back. Please, I'm in the closet this time. He's downstairs. Emily's body went rigid. She whispered, who is he? The voice sobbed. You know who he is. Then silence. Emily yanked off her headset, heart hammering. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her trembling hands covered her mouth as her colleagues glanced nervously toward her. And then, from the far corner of the dispatch center, a phone began to ring. Every operator turned. That phone had been disconnected years ago. The line wasn't even active. The ringing echoed through the center, sharp, shrill, insistent. Emily stood frozen, watching as the light above the dead phone flickered, not with its usual pale glow, but a deep, throbbing red. The ringing stopped, and in the silence that followed, she swore she heard her own voice whispering from that corner, "You can't save me." Emily never went back to 423 Willow Street. She moved into a new apartment across town, but she never truly slept again. Weeks later, she learned something chilling. Long before her, another dispatcher, a woman whose voice eerily resembled hers, had lived at 423 Willow. In 1989, she was murdered in her bedroom by an intruder who was never caught. Emily never told anyone. Not officially, but she knew. The voice hadn't been hers. Not exactly. It had been the echo of someone long dead, a woman crying out to herself across decades. And maybe, a warning. If one dispatcher could hear her own voice crying for help, what else could slip through the wires of a police station? For some, it wasn't a stranger on the line, but something closer, something impossible. Calls that seemed to come from inside the station itself, from rooms no one had entered in hours, from cells that stood completely empty. And one night, a single call would turn an ordinary holding cell into the most terrifying place in the entire precinct. Story 2, the holding cell called the Cleveland Police Precinct was never truly quiet. Even in the dead of night, it pulsed with low murmurs, shuffling footsteps, and the faint hum of buzzing lights overhead. But there was one place inside the building where silence felt different, heavier, suffocating, almost alive. The holding cells. They sat at the end of a long, tiled corridor that always seemed colder than the rest of the station. Officers joked about drafts or bad insulation, but no one liked staying down there longer than necessary. On that particular night, Officer Daniel Ruiz had the thankless job of monitoring the cells. He was new, eager to impress, and completely unaware of the building's darker history. It was 2:37 a.m. when the first call came in. The phone on the duty desk rang sharply, slicing through the silence. Ruiz frowned. The holding cell phones were connected to dispatch only, reserved for inmates making their single calls. But tonight, every cell was empty. Still, the phone kept ringing. He picked it up cautiously. "Holding, Ruiz speaking." Static answered him. Heavy, labored static that hissed and crackled like a storm just beyond the line. Then, beneath it, a voice. Low, rough, broken. "Get me out of here." Ruiz blinked. "This is Officer Ruiz." "Who is this?" The voice rasped again. "I said, get me out." Ruiz glanced down the corridor at the barred cells. Every door hung open, dark and empty. He swallowed hard. "Sir, there's no one in custody right now." "Are you sure you?" The voice interrupted, louder, angrier. "They left me here. It's freezing. Don't you hear the water?" Ruiz felt a prickle crawl up his spine. The station was dry as a bone. "What's your name?" he asked carefully. Silence. Then, almost like a whisper in his ear rather than through the receiver, the voice said, "You already know my name." Ruiz slammed the phone down, chest heaving. His skin crawled as he turned toward the corridor. The air felt thicker now, the shadows heavier. By sunrise, Ruiz was pale and quiet. He told no one about the call, afraid of being mocked. But curiosity gnawed at him. That evening, he cornered an older officer, Sergeant Harris, and asked casually about strange things in the holding cells. Harris eyed him for a long moment, then exhaled. "You heard it, didn't you?" Ruiz stiffened. "Heard what?" "The call," Harris said flatly. "Everyone hears it down there eventually. Some sooner, some never. But when it comes, it doesn't stop." Ruiz pressed. "Who is it?" The older man's jaw tightened. 1982, inmate drowned in that very cell. Broken pipe, flood backed up. They found him clawing at the door. Swore the phones were ringing all night, but no one was on the line. Ever since then, the calls keep coming. Ruiz felt the blood drain from his face. "Best advice, rookie," Harris muttered, leaning in close. "Never answer. If it rings when the cells are empty, just let it ring." Ruiz tried. The next night, he sat at the desk, doing everything in his power to ignore the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant creak of pipes. At 2:37 a.m., the phone rang again. He clenched his jaw, staring at it, refusing to move. It rang once. Twice. 12 times. Then stopped. He exhaled in shaky relief, but just as he turned back to his paperwork, his desk radio crackled to life. A garbled voice spilled through, distorted but unmistakable. why didn't you answer?" Ruiz froze. His radio wasn't even tuned to dispatch at that moment. His hand trembled as he reached for the dial, but before he could touch it, the voice hissed again. "You left me here once. Don't leave me again." Then silence. The days that followed were a torment. Every night at 2:37, the phone rang, and every time Ruiz ignored it, the voice found another way in, through his radio, his cell phone, even the intercom system in the hallway. Always the same words. Always the same desperate plea. By the fifth night, Ruiz was unraveling. Exhaustion carved dark hollows beneath his eyes. His hands shook as he tried to steady his coffee. No one else seemed to hear the calls. The other officers dismissed his stories with smirks or warnings to get more sleep. But Ruiz knew something down there wanted him, and it wasn't going to stop. That night, Ruiz broke. When the phone rang at 2:37, he snatched it up with a roar. "What do you want from me?" The static hissed, then quieted. "I want you to see." Before he could react, the line went dead. A loud clang echoed down the corridor. Ruiz's head snapped toward the holding cells. One door had slammed shut. Hands trembling, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the hall. The air grew colder with each step, his breath visible in the beam's glow. He stopped outside the sealed cell, heart hammering. Slowly, he raised the light. For a moment, the cell was empty. Then the beam caught movement. A figure, half submerged in water that shouldn't exist, thrashing violently, hands clawing at the glassy surface as though drowning again. The man's eyes, pale, frantic, and impossibly aware, locked on Ruiz. The officer staggered back in horror, but the figure lunged forward, slamming against the bars. The phone on the desk behind Ruiz rang again, and this time, the voice screamed, "Now it's your turn." By morning, Ruiz was gone. His chair sat empty, his locker untouched. The only trace left behind was the holding cell phone, still off the hook, the faint hiss of static spilling endlessly into the corridor. Sergeant Harris never asked questions. The younger officers whispered rumors, chalking it up to nerves, stress, maybe even desertion. But every night, like clockwork, at exactly 2:37 a.m., the phone in the holding cells rang. And sometimes, if you listened closely enough, you could hear two voices on the other end now. A dispatcher haunted by her own reflection. An officer swallowed by the ghosts of his holding cell. But the strangest call of all wasn't a plea for help, it was a warning. A call traced back to the very heart of the station. A line that no officer ever admitted existed. And the night it rang, the entire precinct fell into silence. Story 3, the line that shouldn't exist. Every police precinct has its secrets, files tucked away in dusty cabinets, cases no one talks about, and hallways avoided after dark. But the Jefferson County Police Station in Ohio had one secret that wasn't written in any report, one whispered about only by those who'd been there long enough to know better. The hidden phone line. It wasn't on the blueprints, it wasn't listed in dispatch. And according to official documentation, it didn't exist. But inside the oldest wing of the building, in a small, windowless room locked behind two heavy doors, sat a black rotary phone bolted to the wall. And when it rang, no officer dared to answer. Detective Megan Calloway wasn't a believer in ghost stories. She'd worked homicides for 15 years, seen the worst humanity had to offer, and built a reputation for never flinching at the grotesque. So when she was assigned the night shift in the old precinct wing, she scoffed at the rumors. "Phones don't ring without a line," she told Officer Jennings, who'd nervously mentioned it as she signed in. Jennings only shook his head. "Just, if you hear it, don't pick up. Trust me." By midnight, the wing was still. Dust motes floated in the pale light, filing cabinets loomed like tombstones, and the silence pressed heavy against her ears. Then, at 3:03 a.m., the sound cut through the stillness. The shrill, metallic ring. Calloway froze. The sound was unmistakable, echoing down the corridor from the locked records room. Her pulse quickened. She told herself it was a prank, some outdated wiring glitch. But the ringing continued, steady, insistent, dragging her forward like a lure. When she reached the heavy door, she realized it was already ajar. Inside, the black foam gleamed dully under a single flickering bulb. It rang again. Against every instinct, Calloway lifted the receiver. "Detective Calloway." Static hissed on the other end. Then, faintly, a voice, raw, distorted, like it was being pulled from a grave. "You're too late." She stiffened. "Too late for what? You never found me." Her stomach dropped. "Who is this?" The voice rasped back. "You already buried me." Before she could respond, the line went dead. The phone slipped from her trembling hand, clattering against the receiver cradle. She stumbled backward, breath caught in her throat. That night, she told no one. Over the next week, the phone rang every night at exactly 3:03 a.m. Sometimes she ignored it, but the ringing never stopped until she picked up. Each time, a different voice. A little girl whispering, "He won't let me leave." An old man growling, "Check the river." They all sink in the river. A woman sobbing, "You promised to help me. Why didn't you?" The voices clawed at her sanity. They knew details about unsolved cases, fragments of evidence, names never released to the public, descriptions of bodies long buried. One night, a voice whispered her own name. Calloway became obsessed. She combed through records, tracing every voice she'd heard. To her shock, each one matched a cold case file, unsolved homicide stretching back decades. Victims who'd been forgotten by the system. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Every voice belonged to someone whose case had once passed through the Jefferson County station. And every single victim had disappeared between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. on the night they were last seen alive. The exact time the phone always rang. Sleep-deprived and unraveling, Calloway confided in Jennings. "They're calling for justice," she whispered, her eyes bloodshot. "They're trapped in that line, waiting for someone to hear them." Jennings paled. "You don't understand. That's what it wants you to think. But those aren't victims, detective. That's something else using their voices." She shook her head. "No, I can prove it. Tonight, I'm answering every call." Jennings grabbed her arm. "Don't. Once you do, it won't let you go." That night, Calloway sat in the records room at 2:55 a.m., the black phone inches from her hand. She waited, heart pounding. At 3:03, the shrill ring filled the room. She answered immediately. "Calloway." The line crackled. Then, in perfect unison, dozens of voices filled her ear. Men, women, children, screaming, whispering, begging. "You failed us. You left us. Come join us." The sound rose into a deafening chorus until her ears bled. She dropped the receiver, clutching her head, but the voices didn't stop. They poured from the phone, from the walls, from inside her skull. The light above flickered violently. The door behind her slammed shut. And then, silence. When Jennings returned at dawn, the room was empty. The phone dangled from its cord, swaying gently. On the desk lay Calloway's badge, and beneath it, a list of every cold case victim she'd been investigating. A fresh name had been added at the bottom in shaky handwriting: Megan Calloway, 3:03 a.m. The precinct quietly sealed off the old records room. The official explanation was structural damage, but the officers knew better. "They say the phone still rings at 3:03 a.m., faintly audible even through the locked doors. And if you press your ear close enough, you don't just hear the dead. You hear Megan Calloway, too. 3 calls, 3 officers. 3 endings that never should have happened. A dispatcher haunted by her reflection. A rookie dragged into a drowning that happened decades ago. And a detective claimed by a phone line that didn't exist." The question isn't who was calling them. The real question is, what happens when the line finally rings for you? And that is the chilling truth behind the calls that came from inside the police station. 3 stories. 3 warnings. 3 reminders that not every voice on the other end of the line belongs to the living. In the dead of night, when the phone rings and the world feels still, ask yourself, do you really want to know who's calling? Because once you answer, you can't hang up. So, the next time your phone buzzes at 3:03 a.m., remember these stories. Maybe it's just a wrong number. Or maybe, it's already too late.